It's for the best, she'd said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed louder than any scream in that sterile, hushed room. The fluorescent lights hummed, a relentless drone that seemed to amplify the emptiness that suddenly bloomed in my chest. My eyes, dry and raw from weeping, darted between her face, a mask of practiced serenity, and the small, still form in the incubator. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, which had been the soundtrack to my terrified existence for weeks, had faltered, then stilled. A profound silence descended, heavier than I could have ever imagined. And then, she added, as if an afterthought, you were so reckless. My life before that moment felt like a distant memory, a sepia-toned photograph of a life I no longer inhabited. It had been a life of quiet compromises, of tiptoeing around expectations, of a constant, low-grade anxiety that simmered beneath the surface of forced smiles and dutiful obedience. My parents, particularly my mother, had always been the architects of my existence, meticulously designing every brick, every joist, every aesthetic detail of my life according to their own specifications. From the private schools I attended, to the suitable friends I was encouraged to cultivate, to the career path I was nudged towards, it was all a carefully curated masterpiece of their control. Love, in their lexicon, was conditional, measured in achievements and adherence to their unspoken rules. My father, a man of few words but immense influence, would offer a curt nod of approval when I met their exacting standards, a nod that felt like the sun breaking through clouds, albeit a very small, very temporary sun. The house was immaculate, a shrine to order and unspoken judgments, where silences were as loud as arguments and criticism was delivered in the guise of helpful suggestions. I remembered, with a sickening clarity, the suffocating tension the first time I brought him home. Mark. He was everything my parents weren't, spontaneous, kind, messy, and utterly himself. My mother's smile tightened, a barely perceptible tremor at the corner of her lips. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, raked over him, lingering on his slightly rumpled shirt and the faded denim. Later, over a dinner that tasted like ash, she'd confided in me, her voice dripping with concern that was more accusation than empathy. He just seems so unrefined, darling. Are you sure he's ambitious enough for you? You deserve someone who can match your potential. The subtle implication was clear. Mark was a detour, a misstep in the grand plan. My father, across the table, simply cleared his throat, a sound that conveyed volumes of unspoken disapproval. My attempts to defend Mark, to highlight his integrity and his quiet strength, were met with dismissive waves of my mother's hand and pronouncements like, "We just want what's best for you, sweetheart. We've seen more of the world than you have." It was a constant battle of attrition, chipping away at my own judgment, making me question my instincts, making me believe that my desires were somehow flawed or immature. Even the small joys, like an impromptu weekend trip with Mark, were met with veiled criticisms about my lack of foresight or my supposed irresponsibility. They'd call, just when I was relaxing, needing to impart some urgent piece of advice about a bill I might have forgotten, or a relative I hadn't called. It was never about genuine concern, it was about maintaining their perceived oversight of my life. Then came the pregnancy. It was unexpected, a joyous surprise for Mark and me, a testament to our love. My parents, however, viewed it as a disruption of the highest order. The congratulations were perfunctory, laced with a heavy dose of disappointment. So soon, my mother had sighed, her gaze fixed on my slightly rounded belly. This will certainly complicate your career trajectory, won't it? The reality of a premature birth, a high-risk pregnancy, was met not with support, but with a cold, calculating assessment of how this would impact my reputation and their own carefully constructed image. The hospital room became my gilded cage. Mark was a constant, comforting presence, but even his optimism couldn't entirely dispel the shadow of my parents' disapproval. They visited sporadically, their presence marked by polite inquiries about my well-being and pointed questions about the medical staff's pronouncements, as if they were assessing a potential business investment rather than the fragility of my child. I felt their judgment in every hushed conversation, every sigh, every subtle redirection away from the emotional core of my fear. They were observers, detached and critical, waiting for things to go wrong so they could pronounce their "I told you so." The moment was etched into my memory with an almost photographic precision, each detail amplified by the agonizing stillness. The air in the NICU was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the metallic tang of life support. My son, a tiny, perfect being with impossibly fragile limbs, lay in his incubator, a network of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that sustained him. He was fighting, a tiny warrior against overwhelming odds. Mark sat beside me, his hand a warm anchor in mine, his face etched with the same raw fear and unwavering hope that I felt. Then, my parents appeared. My mother, impeccably dressed as always, her expression a peculiar blend of concern and something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it impatience? My father, his usual stoic facade firmly in place, stood behind her, his hands clasped behind his back. The attending physician, a kind woman with tired eyes, had just finished explaining the latest developments, the subtle improvements, the cautious optimism. And then my mother spoke. "It's for the best," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it landed like a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. My head snapped towards her, disbelief warring with a dawning horror. Her gaze, no longer on the doctor, but fixed with chilling intensity on the small incubator, seemed to radiate a cold resolve. "He's suffering, and it's just prolonging the inevitable." My breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" My voice was a strangled gasp, barely audible. My father stepped forward, his voice low and measured, devoid of any emotion. "Your mother is right. We've discussed this. It's become a burden, a strain on all of us. Especially you." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, a dismissive pity, a profound disappointment. A burden? I finally found my voice, a ragged cry that ripped through me. "He's my son. He's fighting." My mother's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of comfort, but of grim satisfaction. "And you've been so reckless, darling. This is the consequence of your choices. We're just helping you face reality." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, which had been my lifeline, began to stutter. The doctor, her face paling, turned to the nurses, a silent command passing between them. The room plunged into a deafening silence, broken only by the soft, almost inaudible sigh of Mark beside me. My mother watched it all, her face impassive, as if witnessing a well-rehearsed play unfold. In the sterile, echoing silence of that hospital room, a chilling calm settled over me. It wasn't a numbness, it was a hard, cold clarity, forged in the crucible of unimaginable pain. The words, "You were so reckless," replayed in my mind, each repetition a hammer blow, not to my spirit, but to my resolve. They had weaponized my love, twisted my vulnerability into an indictment. The quiet I had always lived in, the silence I had endured, was now my ally. There would be no shouting matches, no desperate pleas. Just precision. The legal documents were buried deep within my father's meticulously organized files, a testament to his foresight and his belief in contingency plans. He'd always been about controlling narratives, about ensuring his legacy was ironclad. Buried beneath quarterly reports and investment portfolios, I found them, the trust documents, the prenuptial agreement Mark and I had, at my mother's insistence, signed years ago, a standard clause, she'd called it, to protect everyone. It was an escape clause for her, a shield against any perceived deviation from her meticulously planned future for me. She had meticulously crafted the terms, ensuring that any significant deviation from her approved life path, including, she'd subtly implied in the accompanying letter, unforeseen circumstances that impact financial stability, could be grounds for renegotiation. My parents' financial empire, built on a foundation of shrewd investments and a ruthless pursuit of profit, was inextricably linked to my perceived stability. Their carefully constructed world relied on the illusion of my perfect adherence. The following weeks were a blur of orchestrated quiet. Mark, bless his heart, was lost in his grief, his world shattered. He was my rock, but he was also adrift. I, on the other hand, was an iceberg. I filed the necessary paperwork, discreetly, efficiently. I contacted the lawyer my father used for his business dealings, a man who had always treated me with a cool professionalism that now felt like a premonition. I presented the documents, the prenuptial agreement, the trust stipulations, and outlined, in measured tones, the implications of their actions. I didn't plead, I stated facts. I didn't accuse, I presented evidence. I showed them the clause that stipulated immediate forfeiture of significant assets if trust beneficiaries engaged in actions that demonstrably and intentionally cause severe emotional and financial distress to other beneficiaries, thereby jeopardizing the overall familial financial structure. My parents' actions, in their eyes, were not an emotional decision but a calculated attack. The day I presented the revised trust documents, the ones that effectively rerouted significant portions of their inheritance, was deceptively calm. My mother had summoned me, ostensibly to discuss funeral arrangements, but I knew her true motive was to gauge my level of devastation, to ensure I was sufficiently broken. She sat in her usual armchair, a picture of matriarchal sorrow, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father stood by the fireplace, a silent sentinel. I entered, not with a crumpled tissue or a downcast gaze, but with a slim manila folder. I didn't sit. I stood, my voice steady, my gaze level. I've made some arrangements, I said, placing the folder on the polished mahogany coffee table between us. Following the terms of the trust and the prenuptial agreement. My mother's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. Arrangements, darling? What arrangements? The ones that protect my future, I replied, my voice unwavering. And ensure that those who acted rashly, and caused irreparable harm, are held accountable according to the established parameters. My father's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. He reached for the folder, his movements uncharacteristically hesitant. As he opened it, the carefully constructed mask of indifference began to crack. He scanned the pages, his jaw tightening, his knuckles whitening. The silence in the room was no longer a weapon they wielded, it was a vacuum they were trapped in. My mother, sensing the shift, leaned forward. What is this? I don't understand. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. It's the consequence of your actions, I said, the words devoid of anger, infused only with a chilling finality. You chose to prioritize your control over my life and my child's well-being. The trust documents reflect that choice. My father looked up from the papers, his eyes, usually so assured, now held a dawning comprehension, a horrified realization. He saw the precise execution of a plan he, ironically, had helped to lay the groundwork for years ago, a plan that was now being turned against him. He saw the walls of his carefully constructed empire crumbling, not with a bang, but with the silent, inexorable turning of a legal page. My mother's face, usually so composed, contorted with a raw, unadulterated fury. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She was witnessing the undoing of her life's work, the complete loss of control. It was the precise moment her empire began to fall. The aftermath was a symphony of frantic whispers and indignant calls. My mother's trusted circle of friends, the ladies who lunch, became an army of flying monkeys, their voices shrill with righteous indignation, spreading distorted tales of my supposed cruelty and insensitivity. My father's business associates, once obsequious, now distanced themselves, their loyalty shifting with the wind of financial fortune. The carefully cultivated image of the perfect family, the benevolent patriarch and matriarch, imploded. Texts flooded my phone, a barrage of accusations from distant relatives and acquaintances who had never shown me an ounce of genuine concern before. My mother, stripped of her power and her meticulously crafted facade, unleashed a torrent of veiled threats and desperate appeals through my father's lawyer. The financial ruin was swift and absolute. Their empire, built on the premise of control and legacy, crumbled when that control was irrevocably lost. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confrontations. Just the quiet, efficient dismantling of their world, brick by calculated brick. I moved into a small, quiet apartment across town. The silence here was different, it was not a vacuum of unspoken judgments, but a space for quiet healing. Mark and I began to rebuild, slowly, deliberately, cherishing the precious life we had left. The satisfaction wasn't in their suffering, but in the quiet restoration of agency. The truth, in its cold, unvarnished form, had delivered its own form of justice. The emotional fallout for them was profound, a social and financial implosion that left them with nothing but the hollow echo of their own entitlement. My parents, who had always sought to control every aspect of my life, were now left to navigate the desolate landscape of their own making. I had not sought revenge, only equilibrium. And in the quiet aftermath, I found a profound, chilling sense of peace. The silence was finally mine.